Hey all. Today is episode 3 of this little podcast series thingy. Um, we're going to be talking about generational curses and the influence that it has on mental health. So, sorry, my hair is looking a little whack. Sorry about that. Anyways, let's just get right into it. So, when we're talking about generational curses, actually, I said generational curses, I meant generational trauma. Sorry. There is a difference. That was something I was going to mention. You might have heard like the term generational trauma, generational curses, generational patterns, bloodline curses. Those are all actually different things. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of those because that's just not what this is about. But we're going to be looking at generational trauma. So, when we're talking about generational trauma, we're talking about something that has happened to parent or grandparent, great grandparent, whatever. Either one event or a series of events, or just like how things always were. And it was something that it typically happened when they were young. So they either didn't understand or fully understand what happened, so they weren't able to properly heal. And because of that, they've continued to carry that hurt, and it's been passed down from person to person. That's kind of the definition we're going with when we're talking about generational trauma. Now, generational trauma is interesting because there's at least two components to it. There may be more, but there's at least two. There's the hurt that the person carries. That's the soul aspect of it. That's the, such and such happened to them. And on a personal note, emotionally, they were messed up. Mentally, they were messed up, whatever the case is. And then there is the spiritual element to it. That is the generational aspect of it, I suppose. Or how do I say this actually? Well, that's the, how do I say that? I guess that's the generational aspect of it, where what has happened with this one happens with this one, happens with this one. Because even though like there's the element of it that is that person that hasn't been healed, I've talked about this before, whenever there's patterns, there is a spiritual component to it. And it's no different when we're talking about generational trauma. This is something, obviously, that the world that, modern psychology kind of rejects, but it is true. There is a spiritual component, honestly, to like everything, most things. So anyways, so there's a couple different considerations there, and that's important, and I'll probably come back to that point later. But there's the wound that the actual person sustains in the soul, and then there's the wound of the spirit. So most of us probably have like a good idea of what generational trauma can look like. It can take on many forms. It can be something very, very like legitimately traumatic. Someone in the family murdered someone else or something like that, and it just like, impacted everyone in that family, and then it just went on and it went on. Or it can be something that's a little more minor. I say it like that because it's not, none of it is really minor. Like it's important. If it severely severe, oh my gosh, I cannot speak today, I'm sorry. If it severely impacts you or your child or whatever, it's important. It's a really important consideration. So none of it is minor, but as far as trauma goes, there's, different types or different levels, however you want to say that. So generational trauma can be something as simple as um the idea that like we don't talk about our feelings. And I really want to like stick with this example because this is something that is very synonymous with a certain age range, a certain generation, and maybe certain ethnic groups too, that it's like, we don't consider our emotions, we don't consider our feelings and stuff like that. And this has been something that has been an issue or a way of being. Actually, let me just say it that way. It's been a way of being for generations and generations. In fact, this push to actually consider self, like mentally and emotionally, has been a very modern, consideration. This has not been, even I'm 28, and even within my childhood, like there's been such a difference, like now that I see like there's such a push for mental health and considering that, whereas when I was a child, that just it existed, but it wasn't like this big thing like it is now. So, and then I know like generations before me, it wasn't even a thing at all, so unfortunately many people, that is a lot of the unhealed wounds that we see, a lot of the trauma that we see is simply people either didn't express themselves, or I should say didn't express themselves in healthy ways, because that idea of, oh, we don't talk about our feelings or whatever is inherently toxic, because your feelings are from God. God has given you emotions. God has given you feelings. Now, we can make our feelings a God and let them rule us and get into trouble that way, but they really are from God, and they're not only a way to connect to other people, even ourselves, and even God, if you didn't know that. However, many of us don't handle them in a healthy manner. And if you think like, oh, I don't have to talk about it, well, you're just going to manifest it in an unhealthy way. Like every single person I've ever heard say that is like the most angry and bitter person that I've ever come across. I've never known anyone to say like, I don't talk about my feelings and be like a healthy individual. Nah. So there are generations. The key thing that I'm looking at here with this relationship to generational curses and mental health is that there have been generations up until recently, up until what, like, yeah, the 2000s, that have just operated with life without a push to be self-reflective and aware and accountable and all that good stuff. So this part of it is like my personal take. what we see is a whole lot of people who don't understand emotions, maybe have tried to shut down their emotions, who aren't able to express themselves in a way that, in a healthy way, in a way that they should. Now, before you think that I'm going to rag on like older generations and stuff like that, no. There's more to it. There's more here, but this was part of the message that the Lord gave me, because there's a healing that needs to take place wherever there is any sort of spiritual issue, wherever there is any sin. That means that there's a healing that needs to take place. The Lord's view of it is, He's nicer than us, honestly. His view of sin and everything is that you got a sickness, you've got a belief about yourself, about me, about whatever, that is untrue, and you need healing. We would just be like, okay, you're toxic, but yeah, he's a little more gracious than that. Help me, Jesus. Okay, so generational trauma, especially with not having the ability to even talk about emotions, or know that that's even something that you could talk about, is been a very, very big thing, at least here in the US. I don't know about other places, but here in the US, very, very much a big thing. And again, it obviously it's not every single person. Like, there are exceptions, but it's been a big thing with the past generations, and then with some certain ethnic groups and stuff. So, what's the problem with this? Obviously, if you're walking around with a wound, with hurt, whatever, and you're unaware, there's no room for you to be healed. You can't be healed if you can't if you don't even understand that there's a problem in the first place. You won't be able to receive healing. So, again, there's a lot of people walking around with hurts, with spiritual, emotional, mental injuries. The problem is that we as human beings typically operate with emotions. So if your emotions are not sound, going back to the last topic, if your emotions are not under submission, they're only subject to, how do I say it, what you think is wrong or what you think is right, and how you feel. And if you're operating from a broken place, look out. If you're operating from a broken place, sorry, there's something outside my window. But yeah, if you're operating from a broken place, it's gonna be really difficult to, no, not even difficult. No, it's just gonna be impossible for you to have that sound mind that you need to be emotionally aware enough of yourself so that you don't speak from or operate from, when you're dealing with other people, when you're dealing with your children, blah, blah, blah. That you don't speak or operate from a place of hurt. I'm hoping the Lord will give me a good example that I can like compare it to, but I think most people will understand like what I'm trying to say, hopefully. So a lot of us have that going on. By the way, when I was preparing for this, message, there was something that the Lord like showed me. And it was kind of this idea that you probably heard this phrase, like, I'm the parent, I know what's best for my child. And there's a verse that says something around the lines, forgive me, I don't have it perfectly, but it's something around the lines of we don't even know what to pray for ourselves. The Holy Spirit intercedes for us. And I was like, whoa. So we don't even know what we need. We don't even know the hurt that we're sustaining at times. Even we're blind. So when a parent says something like that, just know, and maybe you're that parent, that you're probably operating from a place of hurt because none of us are perfect, right? And there is no, you could be like the most mom type mom, dad type dad, I don't know, like just like a really like, it's just natural, it's just instinctual for you. But that doesn't mean that you are ultimate authority on all things with, how do I say this? Because I feel like it's going to sound a little like bad, but let's just put it this way. If you can't submit to anyone, you have pride. Just point blank, period. Sorry to say it like that, but that's just the truth. If there is an area in your life in which you just feel like, well, I've got this, blah, 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 like I know it's best, whatever, you've got pride. And it's our natural disposition to act like that and to operate like that, but just know that that's pride speaking. It's actually no different from those who feel like, I don't need God. Like, wow, that's actually kind of sad to think about. Like, there's plenty of Christians who live their life, in fact, most, who live their life as if, like, never consulting God on anything, rarely praying, if ever praying. And they're saying they don't need God, even though they're Christian. And that's actually no different from those in the world who are like, why would I need God? Wow, that's, wow, okay. So, yeah, it's coming from the same place. Anyways, generational trauma. So, if, let me see. Okay, let's give like a little bit of an example of what that looks like. Um, okay, let me use a hypothetical. I was trying to decide if I wanted to use like something closer to home. Or okay, I'll use the example closer to home actually. We'll do that. So, my family is pretty disjunct. Like there's so many of us, but we're very disjunct. Um I am a single child, but my mom has at least 9 brothers and sisters, maybe even more. It's hard to tell. And my dad has 2 siblings. So, big families. However, there was never a set up a system where it was like, oh, we're all one big family. It was never like that. It was kind of like this person over here, that person over here, that one over there. And I feel like it's honestly seen throughout like the family, like who is there's a there like it's just scattered. Okay, it's just scattered. One of the one of the traumas, I suppose, that you could say is that within that not being close, there has not been so no unity and no awareness or drive or whatever to be united and also connect like emotionally or anything like that. This really isn't the best example. I thought about it. But whatever, it'll work. So I only know, let's see, my grandma. I don't know anything before my grandma, but my grandma on my mom's side had a actually, I don't know how her childhood was, but I do know early either it was either her teenage years, like later kind of teenage years or early adult. She had some adverse experiences. Seriously adverse experiences, and she up and left. And you know, she's not around anymore, but she maintained that kind of spirit her entire life. She's what they call a flight risk. Um, Obviously, it is very difficult to form any bond with someone who is not around. Now, my mom, it's unique because she actually wasn't raised by her mom, which has good and bad, to it. But I'll just say that she was raised by people who were not, or I guess yeah, they were family, but again, none of that unity stuff, none of that closeness, that all that kind of stuff wasn't there. And my mom's aware that like, mom comes and goes, her mom comes and goes, my grandma. She's not always there. So there was the initial trauma that my grandma faced. And I know a little bit about the situation, but I'm not going to share it. I don't think it's relevant, but there was that. And this just constant need to run, run, run. That's how she dealt with her trauma. Um, because people have different ways of dealing with their trauma. So she flight risk, no settling down, no being the matriarch, no none of that. Having a disjunct relationship with her kids, whatever. And then my mom, not even raised by her, and also experiencing the lack of my mom in and out in it, or my mom, her mom in and out, that whole thing. So now that's two generations of women who emotional nurturing was not a consideration. And also, it has to do with the time period, too. I have to make that very clear. It wasn't just a personality thing, it was a time period thing. Now, fast forward to me, I'm the exact opposite of my mom. For whatever reason, even before all this push for mental health stuff, I'm the type of person that has always loved. Actually, I don't know if I've always loved, but I've been a bit more emotional than those around me, and I've always wanted to express and be able to connect on that level, blah blah blah. And if you can guess, that just really hasn't been my existence. That is like a very, unfortunately, and what I'm seeking healing from with the Lord right now, kind of a foreign thing for me. Not that we're like super like distant or anything like that, but there's a good amount of distance, you know. Um and how the Lord has healed me recently, or how he is, sorry, working with me as far as healing goes with that, is that if, first of all, if there's two different capacities and someone's not willing or capable of seeing that discrepancy, they're not going to be able to cater to that need, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. If they were never taught that this is something that they need to um analyze within themselves and understand about themselves, blah blah blah, there's a really good chance that they'll never pick up on it. Now, I wasn't taught that. I maybe it was the Lord that himself who taught me. I don't know. Part of it I think is just me, and then part of it was him, but I wasn't taught that, but I picked up on it. But that's not necessarily the case with, my mom. So there is definitely emotional kind of discrepancy there, unfortunately. And to be honest, if the Lord hadn't intervened and I had continued on that path, emotionally, I would have been seriously a wreck. Like, and I'm not perfect. I feel very, very, very not perfect, like very insecure emotionally a little bit. But um the thing is that, thank God he's shown me, like, part of it is just maturity, and then part of it is he's shown me, like, okay, this is how you should kind of consider this type of situation or whatever, to help me and to mold me into a more mature person, because it would have just continued running away, like my grandma ran away from her problems. That's the best that she could do with the hurt that she was given. That wasn't, that wasn't mature, but she didn't know any better. Now, when it came to my mom, oh, I forgot to add, um, that her, my personal take is like her lack of having like a really motherly figure in her life, and knowing that her mom was like here, there, um, created a situation where she probably felt like she wasn't good enough. Maybe even she wasn't loved. I don't know. And that over time, part of it, this is just my personal analysis of the situation, created a situation, a place for anger to really take root. And so that was something that was a really big thing for her. So my grandma was a flight risk. My mom, anger was a big thing, and also my grandma had anger too. Um, and then even I picked up on it, and I actually talked about this in my video, my testimony, where I said that I talked about the Lord restoring my femininity. And that was something that I had actually picked up on, didn't even know how. I was just angry. Like there was no real rhyme or reason behind it, but it was spiritual. I was picking up on my environment, and there was also a spiritual component to it. So thank God he broke that off of me. But I remember it feeling like being like a tangible thing where I was just so angry. Anyways, so what the Lord actually showed me about my family situation is that we have had a root of bitterness that came from my grandma for a while, whereas just, everything is so negative and very, very much a lot of conversation that yields itself to negativity and just a whole lot of just, negative talk and stuff. And that was something that my grandma had, my mom had, I had. Um, so I share all that to say that's more than I like to share, but I share all that to say this stuff obviously has very, very serious implications. It might not seem like it, and we brush it off so much, emotions and feelings, not so much now, but in a general sense, we might do that. But it's very serious when you're dealing with people, when you're a parent and you're blessed to raise a child and impact a child. Very, very, that's a very serious thing. Um, so the issue with generational trauma is that it's so ingrained in a person because it's not only the way that they've operated it, but it's what they've seen, what they've become used to. That it's something that, in order for you to truly heal from, like truly heal from, and make sure it's not an issue for the next generation, is, I mean, you can't just be delivered from it. You actually have to be healed through and through. You have to be healed. Now, the spiritual understanding of healing is different from the worldly understanding of healing. In the world, there's a version of healing that it's like, well, as long as, like, you know, you don't think about it or whatever, it doesn't bother you anymore, you're healed and that's good to go. You're good to go. But healing, when we're talking about it from a spiritual perspective, would look like it's not enough for you to just be like freed from that thing and be at peace or whatever the case is. If you then start to slip into pride or resentment, actually, let me go with that. You start to slip into resentment because of how you've been treated, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe you either lash out at that person or others, thus potentially continuing the cycle. You're not really healed. This is why I've said before that you deception without healing is still deception. You have to not only be delivered from the lie, from the uh spiritual element, the negative spiritual element in the situation, you also have to go through a healing where now you don't turn on that other person, because it's very easy to do. It's very, very easy when you feel like you've been mistreated. Especially like nowadays, we're seeing children being pretty disrespectful. Like literally the idea of respect as a society is just kind of like thrown out the window anyways. But like there is just no like revering parents and older people. It's just like, what do you do? What do you know, old man? Like that kind of like, um mentality. I see it all the time. Now I'm gonna come back to the respect thing because it's really, there was revelation the Lord gave me about that, which blew my mind. But um basically there's just completely just no reverence for older people, authority, all that kind of stuff. And that's also really, really not good. So the pride that we're dealing with when looking at generational trauma can be on both sides, especially nowadays. It can be on the side of the person who has been who has been injured, who has been hurt, and is operating from that place and never seeks healing, never lets that stuff go, whatever the case is. And it could be totally unbeknownst to them, because most of the time, I mean, if you knew you were hurting, you would want healing. So most of the time, it's that they don't know that they're hurting. If not all the time, they don't know that they're hurting. You don't know oftentimes that you're hurting or the full impact of it until you're out of that situation. And this is where there's such a big problem with, I think, nowadays, with how people are with their parents and everything. I know for me and maybe other young adults or so, you've lived in a place, you've had a certain dynamic maybe where you just, you accept your reality as is because that's all you know, that's all you have. But then you get to a certain age and a certain maturity where it's like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Not everything is perfect, you know? And one of the big issues with, and I swear this is not a rag on the older people, okay? I'm going to get to the young people in a second. But one of the issues with the hurt that they're carrying is that they have partnered with pride, and they say things like, well, we don't talk about our feelings or whatever the case is, or I'm your parent, I know it's best, blah, blah, blah. And most of the time that's true, but not always. And if you, again, if you can't be corrected, if you can't submit to anyone, then you have pride. And if you can't be told that you're wrong, you have pride. And unfortunately, many of us have had situations or dynamics with our parents or whatever where, you know, there's never, how do I say this? We've gotten to a certain age, we've gotten to a certain level of maturity where we realize, oh, that was wrong. Oh, they missed it there. Oh, I shouldn't do that, whatever. But then if you try and speak on it, and it matters how you speak on it, but you try and speak on it, even if you do it respectfully, now it's like it's been a thing, a way of life for so long that now they're offended at you. And now you're the problem. Now you're being disrespectful. And it's like, I'm just I'm just telling you, like, this hurt, whatever the case is. Um, try not to make this too personal. But um through my healing that the Lord is working on with me, I've come to realize that one of the things that has made our um many of our relationships with our parents so toxic is that many of them will only, how do I say this? They won't hear that they're doing something wrong. There's no room for them to hear or receive correction. I guess again it's the submission thing, really. And so obviously that's a automatically there's no such thing as any relationship because none of us are perfect. There is no relationship where everything is perfect, where everyone always gets it. And if you don't have a parent or an authority figure or whatever who can admit that, who can realize that, there's a little bit of an issue. So just like a little side note, please, 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 please do not take the mentality of like, well, I know it's best, blah, blah, blah. Please take everything to the Lord. Please, I beg of you. I beg of you. Please. It will not only ensure that you're not always going to get it right, but it'll be a lot harder for you to get it wrong if you have a submissive mindset to the Lord. Excuse me. But you'll be able to handle your child, handle that situation so much more eloquently and in a much better way than you would if you just lean on your own understanding. So I think I might have to do a part 2 to this because this is I don't think that I've finished all that I need to say, and it's almost 45 minutes, almost been 45 minutes. But generational trauma is actually pretty serious and what many of us are dealing with to a degree. A lot of the sins that we're struggling with, that I struggle with, whatever, were things that either my mom struggled with and her mom struggled with, or just plans of the enemy against them that they tried and it worked with them, so they're going to try it with my mom, they're going to try it with me. Now that's more getting into generational like curses, so that's not, we're not going to talk about that, but there is a cross section there between that and trauma. So another example to consider, this is more of like a hypothetical thing, but if you have a situation where someone is they have a dynamic kind of similar to my own where it's not necessarily like they're seriously traumatized, going through some abuse or anything like that, but there's some things that are not quite right. Another consideration to be had is that sometimes how the trauma will manifest will be the person who, sorry, let me not get ahead of myself. The person who experienced it and is realizing, oh my gosh, that wasn't healthy, that wasn't right, whatever the case is, they may feel so upset that now they're like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm the exact opposite. And we see this a lot actually within the religious situation, people who grew up Christian and maybe it was their parents or maybe it was their church or whatever the case is, where things were very strict or abuse happened or something like that. And then they're like, oh, no, 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 I'm not doing that. And so they go in the exact opposite direction. And that can also very much be coming from a place of trauma. People in the world don't see it as that. People in the world embrace that. People in the world embrace, like, oh yeah, like, because I mean, now again, with the whole respect thing, or lack thereof, actually, the disrespect thing, it's like, yeah, just forget about things of old. Forget about, religion. Forget about what your parents told you, whatever. And so now they embrace just when someone, for instance, and I am going to do a part 2 to this. When someone says they're going to go NC or LC with their parents, um that means, if you don't know, it means low contact or no contact. Um which I'm like, wow, that's crazy that it's gotten to the point where it's literally like, it's so normalized that it's like slang. It's a part of the vocabulary because it's that like normalized of a thing. So when people do that and they just, you know, live like a totally opposite lifestyle because of, how they were raised, and they're upset about some of the hurts that they've experienced and all that stuff, and the world embraces that, you think that you're liberated, but actually you are operating from a place of trauma. You're operating from a place of trauma. Let me see if there's anything else I need to share in this part 1. No, I think that's it. So I'm either gonna do the part 2. I I'm thinking I might do it later today. Maybe. I'm not sure. When I started this, if you saw my introduction video, I said I don't know how he's gonna have this done. It looks like he prefers me to do it on Tuesdays. Um so I'm thinking like maybe later today I'll do the rest of the video. I'm not sure. It'll either be later today or tomorrow, but I'll talk about um I'll just let the Lord lead whatever he wants me to talk about. I do know I need to come back to that respect thing because there's a lot to unpack there. I haven't even gotten to the spiritual side of it either, so there's that as well. Um and there may be room for other things that I need to add. So yeah, we'll just see. All right. That's all I have for you. Bye.